Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Pastoral Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary media network, and a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. Folks, I am so excited to have with me today, which is probably what I was saying before. I have with me today Professor Stanley K. Ridgley, who wrote this awesome book, which I read, Brutal Minds, The Dark World of Left-Wing Brainwashing in Our Universities. And he also just came out with this book, already Amazon #1 bestseller, on discrimination and racism studies, DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. Dr. Stanley Ridgley is a clinical full professor of management at Drexel University's Lebow College of Business and has studied at Moscow State University and the Institut de Gestion Sociale in Paris. He is a former military intelligence officer who served in West Berlin and near the Czech-German border, where he received the George S. Patton Award for leadership from the 7th Army NCO Academy. In addition to his teaching, Dr. Ridgley lectures widely in the United States and internationally. He is Drexel's faculty sponsor for Turning Point USA, serves on Drexel's Faculty Senate, and on Drexel University's Institutional Review Board. He is a frequent contributor to national media, including Newsmax and American Greatness, and is also the highly praised faculty instructor for the course Strategic Thinking in the DVD series, thegreatcourses.com. I have heard and seen Dr. Stanley K. Ridgley on many shows, and I am so honored to have you here with me today. Welcome, Professor Stanley.
Thanks so much. I do appreciate that introduction, and it's an honor myself and a privilege to be here chatting with Betsy.
Well, thank you. It is an honor and pleasure for me. I want to start off with, I want to tell the folks, I read the book, Brutal Minds, and I just want to say this is a must-have book to read for every high school student and every parent or guardian that's going to send your children off to college. You want to read this book before you apply for colleges. It is eye-opening, and it is very enlightening. I just was stunned, Professor Stanley, when I read this book. It was very eye-opening for me. So thank you for writing Brutal Minds, and your book, DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education, literally just came out at the end of February, beginning of March.
I think it was a week ago. So it's still fresh.
Okay.
The ink's still fresh on the pages.
Yes, and congratulations. I mean, Amazon #1 bestseller already in a week.
It's a bestseller in that particular category, which I think is wonderful. And it's climbing up the ratings right now, even as we speak, even as people become enlightened. But I want to thank you for your kind review of my previous book of Brutal Minds, which came out a couple of years ago. And it is absolutely necessary for high school students and their parents to read before going off to college. It was written with that in mind, and the idea is making it accessible and to basically show in a thoroughly documented way what's actually happening on the college campuses, rather than continuing to allow a mythical view of the campus as having been unchanged since 20, 30 years since parents went to college, and even before that.
Absolutely.
There are significant changes in the college and university system in the last 15 years or so, especially accelerating in the last 5 years. And this book, Brutal Minds, it really chronicles that. DEI Exposed is kind of an extension of it. It's not really Son of Brutal Minds or anything like that. I've been working on this book for about 2 years now, and it is exactly what it purports to be. DEI Exposed, exposing the con game of DEI, which managed to infiltrate onto the campuses back in 2021 and 2020, 2021, and began to expound a particular ideology, which is noxious, toxic. It is not academic. It is pseudo-intellectual. It's very harmful to our students and faculty, and it's propounded by a group of modestly educated bureaucrats who have no discernible skill sets. And I bring, I think in the vernacular today, I bring the receipts. I name names of the villains. I name the schools. I name the techniques that they use. I list the salaries that they receive, some upwards of $500,000 each. And I really detail the big swindle or the big con, and how it's now being found out, and thanks to this book and other scholars, and how it can be expunged from the university.
I think it's very important, Professor Stanley, for people to actually read both books, because I think it goes hand in hand. Now, since your book just came out last week, I haven't read DEI Exposed, and I'm sure it is, from what I did read about it, and looking at the chapters of what they're about, I definitely, if I was a college student, not a college student, if I was a parent going to send someone to college, this is another must-have book to read, because what's going on in college campuses is a total disgrace. Like when we think DEI, we think in the workplace. I don't know if many people think of it on college campuses, because, as you know, Professor Stan, that after October 7th, what happened on college campuses is so disgraceful and shameful. And I'm glad that people may not like me when I say this, but I don't care. I'm glad President Trump is getting a handle on things and his cabinet.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Getting a handle on things is certainly what he's doing, certainly with respect to the mess that has become higher education. When I say a mess, I'm referring specifically to the DEI mess, and indeed it is. It's a chaotic situation. It is a situation where, as I said, a bunch of anti-intellectual, modestly educated bureaucrats have come onto the campus with no discernible skill set, with a lot of toxic ideology that's basically fake. It's like almost like readmitting astrology and alchemy and other pseudosciences and superstition onto the college campus to then train students in the precepts of these pseudosciences. That's basically the equivalent, and I say this in DEI Exposed. I'd like to say and like to think that we are getting a handle on this, that the more that people understand that DEI is not this wonderful good feelings doctrine that they believe it is. Because when it first rolled out with respect to universities and the workplace, it was left as a kind of empty decanter, so that most people could hear it. Oh, diversity, equity, inclusion, that sounds quite good. It sounds very much like Enlightenment values of the university. But in point of fact, it's not. And as long as this empty decanter was allowed to be filled by people believing the best and putting the best possible spin on the acronym DEI, then the DEI ideologues could have at it as they wished without interference. Now, what DEI Exposed does is, as the title suggests, it exposes the actual doctrine, the actual words, the actual actions, the actual lack of qualifications, the actual weirdness of these people and their project on the college campuses. It encourages people to put aside this decanter of good feeling that they filled themselves up with and have fooled themselves, and to stop being enablers of these doctrinaire folks that I call the DEI cadres, or ancillary apparatchiks, on the college campuses. They have been a noxious, had a deleterious effect on our campuses, and I can't wait to see the whole project exposed and expunged from the campus.
Oh, yes, I agree 100%. What really enlightened me in your Brutal Minds, and I think it goes hand in hand with your new book, is the brainwashing that you talk about in Brutal Minds. When these kids go off to college, and then when they come back from their Christmas break, they hate their parents, some of them, and they feel like they're the oppressors, because they've been brainwashed to think that. That was enlightening to me.
That's one of the goals. That's one of the goals of the people who are doing the actual indoctrination, and they do it very carefully, and they do it very intentionally in a specific way. They're trained how to do this in institutes that are based off campus by organizations like the ACPA and the NASPA. These are organizations I define and explain in Brutal Minds, and students are basically given an indoctrination lesson by basically unfreezing their belief system, changing it, and then refreezing the new belief system. That's what brainwashing consists of. It's called thought reform, and I explain this in detail in Brutal Minds. This type of brainwashing or this type of thought reform runs hand in hand with DEI. What the DEI folks, the trainers on the college campus, are engaged in is trying to get students, faculty, and staff to disbelieve their own experience and to replace that experience with a fake or a kind of an odd and absurd alternate reality. And this alternate reality is this. There's the big con for you. Here's the con story, is that America is an inherently racist country. It's irredeemably racist. It's constructed on something called white supremacy culture. All white people are racist, are oppressors, are exploiters, villains, and all persons of color are oppressed, exploited, and are victims. And DEI grifters, swindlers, managed to convince colleges and universities around 2020, 2021 that this is true. It's a fake story. It's a con story. They tried to convince colleges that they're rampant with racism. That's their word, rampant racism. And the only solution for this would be to welcome a cadre of these modestly educated diversity officers onto the campuses to solve the problem. And it's a problem that you and I, Betsy, know doesn't exist. In fact, Randall Kennedy, who was a black Harvard law professor, came out at the time and said, look, this is absurd. Campuses, university campuses, are some of the least racist places in America. And yet you're trying to say that these campuses are rife with rampant racism. I'll give an example of what I mean by this con story. That's the con story, to convince people that these campuses are rife with racism, and therefore you have to invite us, a lavishly paid bureaucracy, onto the campus to train people indifferently. Here's the problem at Princeton. Here's what happened at Princeton University in 2020. A letter signed by 300 faculty and staff was published and called on Princeton's administration to rectify the situation of anti-black racism and rampant racism on the Princeton campus. This was their words. Now, Connor Friedersdorf was a journalist at The Atlantic, asked the most obvious question here. He contacted the 300 faculty and staff who signed the letter, and he asked them this: can you give me a single example of rampant racism on the Princeton campus that has occurred in the last 15 years? Now, surely, if this is the contention of the letter, you would think that 300 pretty smart people who signed the letter could come up among them with an example of racism from the last 15 years. Not the last 15 months, the last 15 years. He received no responses. They were unable to give a single example of this so-called racism that was supposedly, I should say, rampant at Princeton University. This is the perfect example of the con game in action. It's a fake reality, and they've managed to get college administrators, because it suits them, to believe it. And they want to train people into this fake reality. People like you and me, we go to these training sessions and we're told, don't believe the evidence of your own senses and your own experience. Believe us, who are going to tell you the way reality really is. I think it's a terrible thing.
It is. And I talk to my son. He's 40. But I say, what they say, that America is racist. If America is so racist, why are people coming over here? That's what I want to know.
That's a very good question.
Why? Right?
And why aren't the people who are saying it's a terrible country leaving? That's kind of it's called empirical evidence. It's called the evidence of what's actually happening, the evidence on the ground. the fact is the people who claim this is a terrible racist country, are still hanging around. They can't name anywhere they'd rather be. They can't name anywhere they'd be willing to move to for any length of time. And meanwhile, people from all over the country are voting with their feet, trying to get into this country. The actual reality of what's on the ground, actually disproves virtually everything the DEI folks are saying. But they're saying this: no. Do not pay attention to this reality that you know and experiencing with your own senses. Ignore that reality. That's a fake reality. Instead, believe us when we tell you that this is a racist country that is occupied by oppressors and oppressed, villains and victims. And the villains are white people, and the victims are people of color when that's convenient. Sometimes it includes Hispanics and Asian, and other times it does not, depending on what the DEI folks want to portray. Now, I should say that the anti-Semitism that we've seen on the college campuses over the last, almost a year and a half now, is a result of a lot of this DEI nonsense. Because I think you'll know that even though Jews are not primarily considered white people, in fact, several of my colleagues here in my department where I work, they're former IDF people. Israeli Defense Force people, and they're professors, and don't consider the Mediterranean, dark-skinned Mediterranean people, and quite take it as they're not offended by it, but they disagree with the characterization of being white. But DEI people consider Jews white people, and therefore undeserving of the protections that the DEI office is supposed to provide them. In fact, I think you'll find DEI office are permeated with the ideology of so-called decolonization. And this is the doctrine or the ideology that labels the so-called Palestinians as being the good guys in that particular struggle, and the Israelis as colonizers and bad guys in that struggle. Israel, of course, is the only democracy in the entire Middle East. It's the only multi-ethnic society because it is largely a lot of Arabs there, a lot of European Jews are there, and a lot of certainly Sabras or native-born Jews in Israel. It's a wonderful multi-ethnic society and a democracy, or it's a republic, very similar to the United States. Meanwhile, the countries all around Israel are basically the so-called apartheid states that the Palestinian sympathizers claim against Israel, because Jews have been expelled from almost all of these primarily Arab countries, and the ones who remain are being persecuted. It's kind of an inversion of reality. You're not supposed to look at that and say, oh, I can see pretty clearly who the oppressed and who the oppressors are. I can see who the good guys and the bad guys are. I can see who the proponents of civilization, who are the avatars of barbarism. I can see that very clearly. No. You're supposed to ignore that. You're supposed to accept this theory that is propounded by DEI people that this so-called colonization is a problem in the Middle East, that the template borrowed from what they do and say in the United States is applicable to a small country halfway around the world. And those mainly people who are simply ill-informed, poorly informed, poorly educated, but want to somehow feel good about themselves, get a nice moral virtue signaling hit off of things. They take their fist, make a fist, they ball it, shake it in the air, and join the demonstration du jour that is basically anti-Semitic at its core. And I think that the so-called anti-Israel, it's not anti-Semitic, it's just anti-Israel. There's a very thin fig leaf to cover up the anti-Semitism that is endemic to almost all DEI offices. I think the personnel have outed themselves on numerous occasions for being anti-Semitic. I have an entire chapter of Betsy, chapter 11 on this, called October 7th, The Nakedness of DEI. And it speaks to the anti-Semitism that is rife within DEI offices. I think it's a good read.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Professor Stan, because I was thinking when I was, would see the demonstrations and just getting out of the hand, and I'm thinking, well, this might sound terrible. I was thinking, I'm glad my parents aren't alive to see this because I am Jewish. and they're not here to witness what's going on. And I was wondering, why wasn't the Jewish students protected? Where's DEI supposedly when it comes to them? And you had answered my question, because they're considered white and the oppressors. And it's funny because some people consider Jews white, the Ku Klux Klan doesn't. So now when they ask me am I ethnic, I'm putting down other, because I don't know what I'm supposed to be.
You're fine. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Professor.
No, I was going to say that the administration. I'll give you an example. The administration at Columbia is riven with anti-Semite bureaucrats and anti-Semitic behavior and expressions, and this was demonstrated by the fact that there was a colloquy on the campus sponsored by a Jewish organization, and there were speakers there, and there were a number of bureaucrats were in the audience, and they were texting back and forth, these bureaucrats, mocking the Jewish speakers there, talking about the wealthy Jews and how they're going to spin this and how they turned this incident into a good moneymaker for the people there, and basically using all the anti-Semitic tropes that we've grown to know about. And these people were called to account. Their texts were exposed, and they had to. It was really funny. If they were going to be disciplined, and the discipline, of course, consists of retraining, as if the only thing that everything that goes wrong on a college campus can be rectified with training, as if anyone's really going to. If anyone's an anti-Semite, training is not going to help them. Eventually, some people at Columbia got their heads screwed on right and fired these people as unsuited to working in a student-facing bureaucrat role, making decisions that are supposed to benefit all students. It's almost as if these people who have imbibed this horrendous ideology, it's almost as if they don't see the world the same way normal people do anymore. They're exposed. It's like Irving Janis wrote a book called Groupthink, and he coined the term groupthink. And the idea that everyone around you is going to be iterating the same orthodoxy, and all you do is go back and forth and exchange your opinions, which are all the same, and it's self-reinforcing, and there's no discouraging word. And suddenly, when the real world begins to intrude, as the DOJ's Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights begins to intrude and say, you know what you've been doing violates U.S. civil rights laws. It violates equal protection clause under the Constitution. Moreover, you have abdicated your responsibility in protecting the people who are going to school there and who are in your charge. And it's funny because, not funny, I should say, it's just it's not coincidence that all of the people who are being persecuted on your campus are of a particular caste. It's not it's not like you've lost control and all kinds of differently motivated violence is occurring. No, the violence is of a particular type, and it's clear cut what is going on. And this fellow that the Trump administration has arrested, and I would say the Trump administration, that the Department of Justice has arrested. ICE, I believe, is the organization. His name is Khalil. He is a key leader in this anti-Semitic pogrom, almost a pogrom, on the campus, and he is not guilty, rather, of running afoul some sort of free speech prohibition. No, he's guilty of inciting violence. He's calling for assault, calling for boycotts, calling for bullying, calling for intimidation, calling for threats, and he's trespassing, and he's calling for vandalism and executing vandalism. Moreover, he is funded by Students for Justice of Palestine, which is a well-funded organization, receives a lot of outside money, which by definition means that this guy Khalil has run afoul of the RICO statute against organized crime. He's almost like a mobster. I would go so far to call him a mobster, organizing this kind of activity up to now with impunity. But that's changing now, Betsy, changing.
Well, I'm glad about that. I don't remember who it was, Stan. I saw somebody on Instagram. I can't remember who the person was, but he said something to the effect of is it amazing that these people who are funding these protest demonstrations know exactly what colleges to go to? They go to the leaning left universities. I mean, if I was paying $80,000-$90,000 a year, I wouldn't want my college-age student, daughter or son, to go to these schools. I mean, it's just atrocious.
I'll tell you that one of my colleagues, he had to pull his daughter out of Columbia last year in the 2023-2024 school year because of the anti-Semitism, because of the violence, because of her fear of her safety. She was actually spit on by at her graduation ceremony when she's walking around the campus with her parents, and a pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas demonstrator heard them speaking Hebrew and actually spit. Now, this is the kind of thing we're talking about here. He didn't spit on her because she's Israeli, or he had no idea because she wasn't wearing an Israeli flag pin or anything like that. No, she was a Jewish student, and this is what animated his display of hate, his hatred in his actions. This is what we're talking about here. It's not these high-minded notions of free speech and this high-minded notion of, well, we're going to protest Israel's policy. We're really not anti-Semitic, and then it's all that is wiped away with a student spitting on a Jewish student, a student who's graduating with her parents there, all because he heard them speaking Hebrew. That is anti-Semitism at its purest, I think. And I think that there's a chapter in my book, and you've probably seen the table of contents. It's called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Diversity, which is a play on the Russian forgery of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is a forgery that was anti-Semitic. It was crafted in the early part of the 20th century, designed to basically an anti-Semitic tract, designed to justify pogroms in Russia. And it has had a life of its own. It's been debunked as a forgery for many, many years. Well, there's a kind of Protocols of the Learned Elders of Diversity that I have identified, and I have an entire chapter devoted to this fraud. It's fakery. And it goes to the heart of, again, what I'm talking about when I say the big con. Here's an example of what I mean. This forgery, I say forgery is a list of what are called white supremacy culture behaviors. And it was crafted by someone by the name of Tema Okun. And she did this back in 1999 when she was just a disaffected diversity worker. She came home from a diversity session where she was particularly angry, and she very quickly jotted down 15 behaviors that she just didn't like. Then she decided, I'm going to call this white supremacy culture, these behaviors I simply don't like. And then she wrote a dissertation. She wrote an article, then a dissertation, as she was going to school, and she wrote the dissertation grouped around these white supremacy behaviors. Now, she simply made it up. There's been no study, no social science study to say, well, this is actually what it's so. It's simply the list that she made up off the top of her head because she was angry. She acknowledges this. She said this in numerous interviews. I addressed this in DEI Exposed. And yet, this list is incorporated in DEI trainings around the country right now in universities like the University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, Boston University, Duke University's med school, for the National Education Association. It's an acknowledged forgery. The person who made the list acknowledged that she simply made it up, and yet these institutions of higher learning are incorporating it in what they teach. It's almost exactly the same as if you've got this acknowledged forgery, this anti-Semitic forgery of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, and you've decided to teach about a Jewish culture using this forgery, an acknowledged forgery. And so, again, this is, the big con. The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion is a big con itself. It's a con that you've gotten many people to believe because it caters and plays to people's prejudices, which is essentially what a lot of these DEI programs, policies do, catering to people's prejudices.
Yes, I have to ask you this, Professor Stan. Do you think there's any hope on college campuses now with a new president, new cabinet, reversing all this?
I think it's like an aircraft carrier. It's going to take a while to make to do a U-turn, right? It's going to take a couple of miles to do it. Well, I think that you've got the problem here we see is that this DEI bureaucracy that has been rooted and embedded in the campuses nationwide, these are well-heeled, well-paid people. The top two administrators at Virginia receive more than $500,000 apiece. Two guys receive $1 million, and the third-ranking person receives $400,000. This is all to. It's hard to figure out what they actually do. If you ask them what they do, they're constantly, we're nurturing and fostering and coordinating and uplifting, but no real tangible work that anyone can make sense of. And so these people are not going to go quietly. At Michigan, Tabia Shavu receives $417,000 a year. She's not going to go quietly. Dania Matos at Berkeley receives $331,000 a year to lead with love. That's a quote from her. To lead with love. She's not going to go quietly either. And she's at one of the most left-wing campuses in America. One wonders what kind of racism she's battling at Berkeley. My goodness. So I say all of this because they're not going to understand that they're in the wrong. I bring to the table Upton Sinclair's famous quote. Maybe it's not so famous, but it's a wonderful quote, and it's this: "It is impossible to get someone to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it." And this
that's
is
a
what
good one.
Central. Yeah, it is. It's possible to get someone to understand something when their salary depends upon them not understanding it. And this is the case with the DEI people. They will never accept any kind of argument that basically what they're doing is balderdash. It's fraud. It is a con game, and it's clearly so. And I make that clear in DEI Exposed. And I think that when people stop defending DEI because they fill that empty decanter with their own good feelings, and so they take it personally when you're attacking DEI because, in a sense, you're attacking their feelings about DEI rather than examining what exactly is going on the campuses. And I think that once you understand that, you're going to say, my God, I didn't know this was going. I didn't know I was just duped. And no one's going to want to admit that you're a stooge or that you were duped, you were fooled by these people, that you're part of the con. No, I think that when DEI folds, when it begins to go away, it's going to go very quietly. We saw DEI arrive with great fanfare and great ballyhoo back in 2020, 2021, and a lot of these, like I said, modestly educated bureaucrats arriving on the campuses with great fanfare. They're going to go quietly. What's going to happen is their positions will be dissolved. These people will be transferred, maybe ushered out of the university. It'll be done quietly. There will be no announcements. There will be no, very few announcements. There will be no examples of notices to parents that we're revamping. We've acknowledged that DEI is a bad thing, that we were fooled, that we were duped, and we're going to eliminate that. No. They're going to do it in a way that is politically palatable for them, so that no one is blamed for launching this expensive bureaucracy on their campuses. It'll go quietly, and I think it's going quietly now.
Wow. Professor Stanley, it is so refreshing talking to you. I have to be honest. I interviewed, people, I've been doing this for 5.5 years, and I've interviewed people about DEI, mostly in the workplace. But it's so refreshing to hear you talk about DEI, how it's affecting college campuses. We didn't even get to workplace. Yeah. But this is so important that I want people to know about it. And I'm so glad that you had the time, I know you're a very busy man, to come on my show and to discuss some of your book, which sounds excellent. It is excellent because it's already, like you said, a #1 bestseller in the area of discrimination, racism studies on Amazon in a week, folks. #1 bestseller in those categories. I mean, that is just, that's wonderful. That speaks volumes of how people are receiving your book. People are hungry for knowledge. You know that, Professor Stanley. People are struggling. And I highly recommend your books. Go ahead.
I do as well. I want to point out that, you and I and most people look at this scam, and we've known there was something terribly wrong with this DEI, although we couldn't put our finger on it. What's wrong? We knew that there was a disconnect between what these people were saying publicly. Here's what they say publicly. Oh, DEI, that's just about, working for a level playing field, making sure everyone gets a fair shot. It's just teaching about race. It's just teaching about slavery. And everyone nods and kind of like, oh, okay. Without questioning, without looking at what the actual programs on the campuses are all about. And moving to the workplace without looking at what these so-called DEI or diversity officers are actually doing in the workplace, in these businesses that are one by one dumping their DEI program as being an albatross, an expensive albatross. The people who come into these businesses, just like the ones who come into the universities, they're grifters. They're swindlers. There are people who hung out their shingle, 15, 20 years, and they say, well, we've got 20, 30 years of experience working in the diversity field, which really is a non-existent field. It's people getting paid to come in and tell your employees that they're racist, coming in and basically stirring the pot where there may or may not have been some kind of problem, but there sure is one now, because you've come in and you've declared that perhaps 2/3 of your workforce are racist by virtue of their skin color. And you've declared that a fourth to a third of your workforce are victims, and the victims of this racism, and need to be on the qui-vive, need to be on the lookout for the unintended slights that they call racial microaggressions, which is a made-up phenomenon. It's just completely made up. And I talk about the made-up category of racial microaggressions in the book DEI Exposed. It's basically made up and given cachet because there's really hardly, if any, overt racism on campuses nationwide. It's just what we have to do is we have to pump up the impression, the perception that campuses are racist. And so we're going to create a new category, racial microaggressions. So what does this consist of? Well, the only people who can suffer from racial microaggressions are people of color. And if you feel that someone is looking at you funny, or someone asks you a friendly question like, hey, where are you from? Because you're a new student here, you're supposed to take that as an assault on your identity as a person of color, and you're supposed to report that. You report that to the DEI office. And I should mention that these DEI functionaries create snitch lines where you can report these types of imaginary racial slights on a line, a snitch line, that will then call into to being a bias response team that will investigate, perhaps bring charges against the person who is guilty of making this microaggression. And you may not even realize that you've been charged with something, or that you're being investigated for something. That's the kind of weird climate, the weird ethos, the weirdness of DEI, creating a world of hyper-suspicion, a world of unappreciated genius in these folks, externalization of blame, the unwillingness to accept responsibility, rejecting the reality of the true and false. And I want to say something here. I think this a number of times, half jesting, in the book, where these people, for these folks who do this DEI stuff, they don't really believe in the true and the false. What they believe is what matters is that it could be true. So if there's a hate hoax, meaning a hate crime hoax, where someone simply made up something, pretended to be assaulted, like Jussie Smollett, but it doesn't matter whether it's actually true or actually happened. What matters is that it could be true. And I'm very serious about this. This is their perception of what's happening. And this enables them to dismiss any type of disconfirmation. So Jamal was not the victim of a hate crime. He made it up. And their response is, well, it doesn't matter whether it was true or not. What matters is it could have been true, or it could be true. This is bizarre, and it's antithetical to everything the university stands for with regard to scientific investigation, what we know about truth, what we know about logic, and what we know about reason. It's really a strange world on the college campuses.
Yes, and I mean, we could spend the whole show on just victimhood, right? Being the victim.
Yeah. Yes, because that's the name of the con. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I would love to have you on again, Professor Stanley. You are such a treasure. You are a treasure, and I just thank you for writing, these two wonderful books and coming on my show and just being authentically who you are and raising awareness. Thank you for that. Where can people buy your books? I know on Amazon. Is there anywhere else? Do you have a website that you like people to buy from?
Well, if I had my preference, I'd have people go to Amazon and purchase it there. Barnes & Noble is another. You can order it at Barnes & Noble. And it's both books, as a matter of fact. I should tell you it's available in paperback, hardback, Kindle version, and right now, even as we speak, an Audible version is being prepared and should be available within a week. It's not read like me. I did the Audible version for Brutal Minds. I've got a professional guy. I really like this guy. His voice, he's measured, and he's doing a very good job with the Audible of this book. So I'm looking forward to hearing the entire book. It is a long book. It's meant to be, because it is. I meant for this to be the resource, the go-to resource for DEI. If you want to know what's wrong with it, just read this book. And I quote chapter and verse. It's 458 pages. It's got over 600 footnotes. If you really want to get down and look at the sources, I challenge anyone to find any mistakes in this book or misquotations or any type of error. I'm happy to correct it, but I feel certain that that won't be necessary. I let these purveyors of this noxious doctrine speak for themselves. That's the key to having a powerful, I think, narrative. Let them speak for themselves. Let them tell you what they do and how they do it. And you can be the judge as to whether you think this is something that ought to be on in the colleges and universities, and basically dominating the intellectual life of our young people.
Absolutely. And where can people connect with you?
Oh, the best place is LinkedIn. Just search me out on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Just send me a message, and I'm happy to discuss with you anything we've talked about today, maybe even become a connection. But most of my writing and my work appears there on LinkedIn. My website, which is called brutalminds.com, is also a good place to go, where I publish articles of interest with regard to DEI and the rollback of this noxious, toxic doctrine. Again, it's brutalminds.com, one word, Brutal Minds. And I think people can really get educated on the toxicity of this doctrine simply by reading a number of these articles.
Definitely. Well, I want to thank you, Professor Stanley K. Ridgley, for connecting with me on LinkedIn. And I said, I got to ask you to come on my show. And I'm so honored that you did. Folks, you heard Professor Stanley K. Ridgley, and this is the last name, Ridgley, PhD. His book is DEI Exposed, How the Biggest Con of the Century Almost Toppled Higher Education. And I also recommend Brutal Minds, The Dark World of Left-Wing Brainwashing in Our Universities. These are two must-have books. They are a must to read before you apply for college. That's for sure. I would urge every parent of a high school student to read these books, and high school students to read these books, and anyone else who wants to know about DEI, the real con, as the biggest con, as Dr. Stanley K. Ridgley puts it, to read these books and thank you so much, Professor Stanley, for coming on today and talking with me. I just love reading your post on LinkedIn also. And all the information, folks, about Professor Stanley K. Ridgley will be in the blog that Jeannie White writes, who's the station manager and produces the show. And I want to thank you all for listening, subscribing. If you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, it is for free on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Music, to name a few. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passion World Talk Radio Network, who makes this all possible. And please share the show. Please tell people about the show. I have experts on here to help you, resources, excellent resources, and Professor Stanley K. Ridgley is an excellent resource of DEI, of what's going on in colleges today. He's a professor himself on a college campus, and I know that Dr. Ridgley knows what's going on, and Google him. Google Dr. Stanley K. Ridgley. You'll see him on so many shows. He's on TV. He's all over. So I want to thank you again for spending some time with me. I know you're busy. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, because we need it now more than ever. And if you want to follow me, I'm on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passion World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Bye-bye now.